Adventure Ho Illumineers, and welcome back to another episode of the Ducktail Dads. I'm one of your hosts, Nathaniel, joined by Mac. We're down one Ducktail Dad, no Ryan, but we do have a special guest for you all on tonight's episode, and that is our good friend Ernie. Ernie, welcome back to the channel.
The three-peat.
The three-peat. Have I beaten Christian yet, guys? Or is this the tie?
You might be tied now. I think both of you have been on 3 times.
I gotta come one more time. I gotta beat Christian. You know how that goes.
I was going to say, unacceptable for Ernie to be behind Christian in just about anything. So that tracks. So yeah, really good timing, I think, to have Ernie on the podcast tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the more recent larger events, some of the decks that we're seeing start to really pop up more, kind of building off of last week's episode, as well as kind of looking towards the back half of the set, right? Like Set Champs is not that far away. So it's really, I think, for those who take that time frame pretty seriously, it's time to start preparing for that, what you're going to expect to see, all that other fun stuff. But before we get into anything with the cards, let's talk about Ernie. What's new in your world?
So 2 things. Played a little bit of Lorcana. On Sunday, we had a draft. So it was a really good draft at Issues Needed Comics. This set to draft or play to limited has been very, very fun. So they're finally figuring it out and getting their stride as far as Ravensburger. And exciting to play limited events now, for sure. And then from a personal perspective, myself, my wife, and my 2 daughters went to go watch the new Pixar movie, Hoppers. Highly recommended. Highly, I have adult kids now, right? So, but it was Pixar gold. It is on par with some of the better Pixar movies for sure. So
amazing. I love hearing that. Love hearing another movie that hits, especially in the Pixar realm. So, and also Ernie, very on brand, as we're like legitimately only 2 months away from Pixar joining Lorcana. Let's go. Love to hear it. But yeah, Ernie, that's awesome. Mac, what's new in your world, man?
Yeah, usually this time of year, we're just on the heels of the Daylight Savings Weekend. And especially those with young kids, I'm sure can relate. That can sometimes be a struggle for kids adjusting to that hour. However, my kids actually have done very well this past weekend or the last couple days with this transition. Both boys have slept completely through the night, both nights so far, and we're hoping that we have three in a row tonight. So we've lucked out. The transition's been nice, so therefore me and my wife have been able to sleep more consistently throughout the last 2 nights, which has been awesome because with the bathroom remodel that I'm doing, that I've mentioned before, I took full advantage of DLC Ghent and tried to follow the stream as much as possible. So while I was doing my chores and working on the bathroom at home, that was definitely playing in the background for me. A lot of trends were observed for sure, and we will for sure get into a lot of that throughout tonight's or this episode's discussion. But it was a lot of fun to take what I am starting to observe from a meta trend perspective and apply that to my own decks. Unfortunately, the decks I find more enjoyment playing right now are definitely not a part of the top 3 that we've been seeing. So that's something I'll have to get used to and maybe tech for, or maybe just pivot. But other than that, overall, it was a lot of fun following the stream. I really love DLC seasons and being involved with kind of not only the hype, but obviously in the middle of it, and then talking kind of the week after on kind of what the community's reaction is to these bigger events. So a lot to talk about, and I'm excited to go through it. Nathaniel, I'm going to send it back to you. What's new in your world?
Yeah, I think, Mac, I long for a day where we still can get by with tier 2 decks, right? I think we've talked about this in the past before, right? Where oftentimes there are, the tier 1s that, rise to the top, but there is a world that has existed before in Lorcana where if you knew your deck really well and you knew exactly what your game plan was into each one of those more popular decks, there's a world where you could have quite a bit of success. Ernie's going to help break down why that might not necessarily be the case right now. But yeah, we'll see. I don't want to spoil too much from a kind of a preview on that. But from my perspective, on the Lorcana front, I am discussing the possibility of attending. And again, I'm going to give another plug for the Game Center case tourney this upcoming Saturday. I'm trending towards possible on that one. I really hope I can attend. It seems like it'd be a ton of fun. And Game Center also just is a really cool store. Another one of those that has an actual like cafe situation inside, which that's just super convenient. I love that. And Game Center is also the store that hosted the 2-year anniversary event that we attended last summer, and that was an absolute blast. So would love to get back out there. From a personal life perspective, it's getting nice outside, which we definitely like. Yes, daylight savings, of course, we're working through that, but man, it is so fun just to be like touching grass, right? When you live in like the climate that we're in, you can go like 5-6 months without touching grass. And so just like throwing my oldest some softballs so he can use his plastic bat and just crash him, crank him into the yard. That's has been a ton of fun. So definitely riding that out. Hopefully we are officially into real spring weather here in Minnesota. With that, do want to also plug that because we plugged this on the last couple episodes. As we're getting closer, might as well do it again. The Game Center, of course, tournament, as I mentioned, this upcoming Saturday. That is March. Oh my gosh, I'm losing it. 14th. And then the following weekend is the MankatoCon tournament. I have reached out to both of the people who are kind of been tasked with helping coordinate those events. So you will see some assets for those on our Instagram page. Okay, without any further ado, let's get into the meat of this because we've got a huge brain on this episode with us, and that is Ernie. He roasted us for our take on Sailor's Deck last week. He had to get on here to clarify things for everything that's been going on and the absolute craziness around the Dogs decks. And so Ghent happened this last weekend, DLC Ghent. And we did actually have 3 locals that attended. That was Vo and the Lorcana twins, Wade and Aaron. So that's super awesome. Vo actually was, and Vo and Wade did both make day 2. So really nice to see some locals have some success at these bigger tournaments. I know, Ernie, I think you're planning on going to one soon. I'm sure you'll get super far. But I think we're seeing an interesting, but also anticipated and expected breakdown on some of these percentages, right, Ernie? The meta breakdown, I'm going to let you talk through this, Ernie. The meta breakdown, what you saw, why maybe it's not a surprise, or maybe what did surprise you.
Sure. So Ghent was interesting in that it had 4,000 players, right? So it in fact had 2,000 player tournaments, and then they had a grand final. So the winner of the Friday event, the winner of the Saturday event, they went through the top cut. The 2 top players played a grand final, which was kind of cool. But in essence, it was 4,000 players. So on Friday, the meta breakdown was Amethyst Steel had almost 26% of the meta share on Friday. Amethyst Sapphire, or Blurple, as we like to call it, had almost 23% of the share. And Dogs only had 14.5%. But when you get to the top 16 from Friday's breakdown, 6 Dogs decks, so 6 Emerald Amber, 6 Amethyst Sapphire or Blurple, 1 Amber Sapphire, Blue Yellow, 1 Amethyst Steel, and 1 Emerald Amethyst. So while the Dogs only had 14.5% of the meta share, they had 6 of the top 16, which is crazy for a Friday. And then Saturday, which you tended to have most of your United States players play on Saturday, the meta share shifted just a little bit. Amethyst Steel was still the top played deck with 24%, so slightly down from the 26%. Amethyst Sapphire was down to 20%, and Dogs was up to 18%. And then the top 16, 8 of the top 16 were Dogs decks. Now, one of these decks was actually a Dogs deck with the Circle of Life combo in there. So that you had that. So it's a Dogs deck, but not a typical Dogs deck. Then you also had 3 Emerald Sapphire decks, green-blue, 2 Amber Steel, and 2 Amethyst Steel, and finally 1 Amber Amethyst, so 1 purple-yellow. And I know that's Nathaniel's favorite deck right now is the amber yellow, but it didn't have a great showing. If you think about it, only one in the two top 16s or the top 32.
Yeah, that's so crazy. And the thing that caught my eye, I mean, we'll get a lot into the dogs list, and that's kind of going to be the lion's share and the meat potatoes of this, right? Also, at first glance, the fact that no Blurple made top 16 on Saturday, which is Amethyst Sapphire, that's kind of crazy to me, because we were discussing last week, and I know the community is kind of, I think, uniformly has kind of agreed that Blurple has been a tier 1 list really since Fabled, for sure, right? And the fact that this quote-unquote tier 1 list did not make up any of the top 16 decks on one of the 2 days is kind of crazy to me, or at least that's something that caught my eye. And then kind of the third thing, and I know you want to make some points about the Amethyst Steel list, because I feel like you were high on it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that really didn't see a lot of showing in top 16 either. It was pretty dominated by dogs, right? So at first glance, it's a little eye-opening. The conversion rates from the at least the overall lion's share, the participation rates are pretty different when comparing the strength of this list, it seems. What are your first thoughts, Nathaniel?
I think I'm really surprised at how poorly Amethyst Steel converted. Like, it's not surprising to me that it was popular, and I think the natural... Like, if I'm thinking about, Mac, you mentioned the Trinity last week, right? Between control, mid-range, and aggro decks. If I'm suspecting that there's going to be a lot of more aggressive... I mean, I think dogs, Ernie, you're going to talk more about how it's not necessarily like a true aggro list in some ways, but like, if you're kind of looking at that as like an aggro list that's like growing in popularity, the natural response, in my mind, is to run a mid-range deck. And that would be the best one of those is Amethyst Steel. And again, that sliding scale of like where Amethyst Steel can go with like how big does it want to get, how fast can it go. You can do some pretty crazy things with Amethyst Steel right now. And Angel is an amazing anti-aggro-ish, tech card. That I don't even want to call it a tech card because I feel like Angel's in a lot of those lists now at this point. But to me, to see that not be able to like convert that well and dogs to still just like overwhelmingly convert, it feels like it doesn't have enough tools to do it, or is it that dogs is that good, right? And I think that might also explain some of the lack of Blurple or Amethyst Sapphire on that first day, right? Where not the first day, this is Saturday, right? Yeah, so why that is struggling, because that cannot really handle a wide board. I think you might see Emerald Sapphire be able to do a little bit better in that respect, because there is a board wipe. So you actually can take out 6+ characters in one turn, even if they're upright, right? Versus Blurple can't do that. So I think it's surprising to me, just because I think, to your point, Mac, like I have seen Blurple, especially ever since rotation, it has just felt like the big bad control deck that can like also do some mid-rangey things, right? That can like manage a lot of the like quicker decks as long as it just gets like a few characters out, right? I used to get beat by it a lot when I ran Amethyst Steel, and it is probably one of the worst matchups for Amethyst Steel. It's surprising to me though, right? Ernie, help us understand why are they doing bad?
Well, so what I'd say is, I mean, what we just showed here is, what I just went over was the top 16, right? So, day 2 conversions would have been a little bit different than this. So let me share that part. But I think the thing with both the Blurple deck and the Amethyst Steel deck is they're still trying to find their way in the meta, right? So you can, like Amethyst Steel, you can build it low to the ground, aggro version. You can play it more mid-range. You could do anything in between. It has so many tools. And I think what it needs to do is the meta needs to settle a little bit, and then it needs to be able to respond from the Purple Steel perspective. Blurple, I mean, I think it overall had a pretty decent showing. It didn't have any top 16 cuts, which what I would agree with Mac. That was kind of shocking and surprising. But if you look at it, there was more dogs lists, and that dogs is just a very hard matchup for the Blurple player. And then 3 Emerald Sapphire lists made it, and that also beats up on Blurple pretty bad, right? So what that tells me is on Saturday there for Blurple, it could have just been some bad matchups, some bad breaks. And that in a big tournament like this, sometimes it's the luck of the draw. And I'm not saying the people that made the top 32 are lucky. By no means am I mean that, but you just got very good matchups to get there too. There's some really great players that don't even make day 2. So and that's very matchup dependent too. And so I think you're going to see. I still think the Trinity is still there. I think Purple still, Blurple, and we'll cover it a little bit later what they bring to the table. But I think they're going to still be there and they're still going to be pushing. And once Purple still figures out the lane it needs to run, it's going to start running. And it's the card advantage decks. Even if it's not completely optimal, card advantage carries it a long way, to be honest with you guys. So
yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. I think it's the variance thing I think matters, right? Like the matchups can be negative or positive depending on the tournament. I think that exists too. I think just what I've felt, especially the last set or so, was like in a Purple meta, generally speaking, Amethyst Sapphire Blurple is just like so good because it gets to do the purple things first, and then it has this like amazing top end, and it has all these card advantage cards in between that help it really be this amazing engine that just like gets over decks so well. And I was talking with Mac a little bit about this, where with the re-release of Let It Go, when you play so like Emerald Sapphire is different because there are some board wipe options available to you. There's Heads Held High that was popular during Fabled, and now it's usually the Prince Philip combo with Malicious, Mean, and Scary. But usually, if it was like a control deck where like, I'm going to play big characters, you're going to play big characters, Blurple just has so many tools right now to remove the like really important threat that I just felt like it always ends up like when the dust settles, it's there still standing and still churning out cards. And the other one is like, I'm out. I have no more resources. And I think as like what I foresee happening a lot of times in like Amethyst Steel against Amethyst Sapphire matchups is like, sometimes you go a little bit faster. You're like, okay, I'm going to rely on like genies and docks and just kind of like, gradually sort of keep playing 2 or 3 cards a turn and get enough resources on the field where like the control decks can't hold me back long enough or for enough times. And, it's like those moments, right, where as the non-Blurple player, you're like, okay, I need this Yzma to like stick for a turn. And it's like, no way. It's like that's immediately getting Force Exerted or Let It Go or Hades. Like they always have some way to like not let that card that like has to stick for a turn. So that's why I think to me it's surprising that there wasn't at least a few that went pretty far or the distance for that matter. I think it does speak to just how overwhelming that matchup against dogs can really feel for a slower deck.
Yeah, I would agree. The thing, though, that I think is one of the tail end conversations from Ghent, especially, and I'm going to get into it because I think it needs to be talked about, is dogs a problem right now? Is there too much in this deck? And there's been a lot of talk about banning. Let's just throw it out there and maybe altering this deck. Is it too strong? I, for one, think we're pushing the edge. Now, I will put my hand up here and say 2 sets ago, everyone was hammering home. And Ernie, we talked about it with you the last time you were on. It was the Amethyst problem. And now it seems to have transitioned to this dogs problem. Now, comparing the two with the Amethyst issue versus now what people are talking about in this dogs issue is right now, at least to me personally, this dogs issue, and especially watching the stream, like it almost feels overwhelming at this point in the sense that this dogs list seems to be doing almost everything. It has decent draw. It cheats out ink, especially with Grandmother Willow. It can board wipe. It can deck filter insanely well with the Tramp. Like, it has so much going for it that I think that's where the bulk of the frustration is. Compared to other strong decks, not only with Blurple in the past couple sets, but like lists over the past year or in just Lorcana's history. I know we've talked about like Red Blue, obviously the Hiram ban, and then obviously with Sapphire Steel items, like there was a lot of conversation there, hence the Hiram ban, and Fortisphere affected that deck too. Like, do we have a problem now? And I kind of want to open that discussion. What are your thoughts on that, and potentially, the big bad ban word? What are your feelings there?
Want to go first, Nathaniel, and I can follow it up?
I mean, I think my own take on this is if a deck just feels... I think back to the only time that Lorcana has had a ban in the 2.5 years the game's been out, right? It was around Hiram. And that was because of the fact that allowed blue decks to... Kind of to your point, Mac, they just kind of got to do everything then, right? They got to draw cards, cheat out ink via ramp, and like cycle that card draw. And it's like sort of against, in some ways, like the identity of the ink, right? Like it's not supposed to be like the card drawing color, right? And I think, Ernie, you actually attended a tournament where it was just bonkers, right? Like everyone that went far, it was either Sapphire Steel or Ruby Sapphire. And it's like, that was like everything at the top. And that's like right before they did the Hiram ban. So I think there are some similar signs here where it's like, yes, this deck can kind of do like so many different things. And it's like so multifaceted that in some ways it's like it has more than one identity to it. And it can just do all the things that a lot of other decks can do. I don't think it clearly isn't like unbeatable. It just feels like there are some play lines. And I remember there was a comment that Christian made, I think it was like right before rotation. And I really like this because I think back to it often when games do sometimes feel like non-games. He had mentioned, like, I want my decisions to matter in card games. And I think in Lorcana, right, like, you want your mulligan decisions to matter. You want what cards you ink and what cards you actually end up playing. You want those choices to, in some ways, like, actually matter. And I think oftentimes, like, if you look back at your matches, whether it's, you record them and kind of look back on them, like there are sometimes some decisions that you made, micro decisions that were potentially incorrect. And maybe you didn't know it with the information you had at the time, but then you can learn from that, right? I think when decks become so good that it just creates a non-game, that's where it starts becoming, I think, a problem. So if it's like, if they can just, I'm going to say the words again, just puke out all these characters so fast and then board wipe you, and you just can't do anything about it with most all of the other decks that exist, that's probably a problem. I'll pass to Ernie. He's probably got some more better words for it.
So I think, Mac, yes, there's a problem. Dogs is definitely a problem. So to answer that question first, I think the thing that'll be interesting, there's a Lorcana challenge, I believe this coming weekend in Asia. Was one of the Asian countries has one. It'll be interesting to see what the meta share will be. Because if you look at it, the meta share wasn't overwhelmingly dogs, right? It was 18% for Saturday was the biggest percentage, but it was the third most played deck. But it was very, very successful, obviously, conversion rates, right? 44% of the top 32 was a dogs deck. And I believe 22% conversion rate to day two as a whole. When they only had less than 18%, it was 18 and 15%. So very, very successful. So the question will be, how does the players respond for the next DLC, which is just next weekend? And do you see those numbers bolster? I think that will signal, all right, Ravensburger, we have a problem. We'll do something. But I would say, yes, we have a problem. And the problem is not just dogs. I do think that Grandmother Willow really hypercharged the dogs deck, right? Being able to play a turn 3 big Tramp. I don't even know his full name, but Tramp, the 7-drop Tramp, um, is ridiculous. And then um, I think there's still the purple problem, right? So I think there are decks, and we'll talk about some of the anti-dog tech. There are decks that have anti-dog tech, but the problem is purple's still so good that it's beating down those decks that are they're trying to go after dogs. Do you tech hard for dogs when they're less than 20% of the meta, and more than 50% of the meta is purple decks? That's a challenge, right, for a player. And that's why some of the conversion rates don't make sense in this one, because there was people hunting dogs, and then there was the people that just beat the purple decks that beat everything, and then the dog decks that are beating all the purple decks. So it was a very weird DLC from that perspective, and it's going to be interesting the next couple sets, next couple big tournaments that happen. What's going to happen? I do hope um, that Ravensburger does something. We only had one ban, but if you remember, Bucky was such a big problem that they had to errata Bucky. Right, so I kind of consider that a ban too, in a sense, right? They changed that. They had to change the card to fix it. I think that's even bigger. So um, they definitely need to do something. Hopefully, they do it before set champs. I do think, even though dogs is probably the top deck, and if they don't do something by set champs, it just depends on the set championship you go to, will determine what you see. Because set championships it's not a DLC. It's not a super competitive tournament. You can get some competitive set championships, and there's great players, but you get players like Christian, who's playing fun stuff, right? I mean, Mac, you had, yeah, you the last one where you played very well. You were playing a good blue still list, but before that, you were playing like a detectives list. Yeah, I mean, you weren't trying. I mean, you were trying to be competitive, but you weren't trying to win. Obviously, you wouldn't be playing detectives otherwise, right? So I think that'll be interesting to see what happens, because there's a lot of grumblings about Ravensburger and some of the decisions, and you don't want to lose interest in the game, because if a meta gets stale, people start walking away from the game, and that's very dangerous.
I'm optimistic because, for what it's worth, I think Ravensburger in the past has historically shown that they're willing to listen and answer. Kind of when the community has been frustrated, especially with Hiram last year. Kind of pivoting to comparing what's happening now versus what happened a year ago with Hiram. Do you see what's like the similarity or maybe some key differences between the Hiram problem and maybe what's happening now? And because, quite frankly, when as much and as frustrated as I've been with Blurple just dominating the meta over the past, like, Blurple has been good even pre-rotation. Like, it was a viable deck for almost a year now. But like right now, like, to Nathaniel's point, like, wanting your decisions to matter, it almost feels like that we're moving in a direction where that's kind of not becoming the case anymore, to where it ultimately led to a Hiram ban last year. So do you see any similarities right now, or is it a little different, in your opinion, to what happened a year ago?
I do think there's similarities, and we discussed this, I think maybe the first time I was on the podcast, where you want Ravensburger to create cards that are just on the fringe of needing to be that of the power level that they could be banned. And I think what happens is, as you get this many sets in, right? So we're one more set away, and then it's rotation, right? So as you get this many in, some of these cards, you're balancing, you're trying to balance a card in a very limited view, and they try to be as far ahead as you can, but you can't predict all of these things. And so I'd rather them continue to push the boundaries and then ban every once in a while like this. I've been hearing people say ban Grandmother Willow. I don't think you should, but I do think Grandmother Willow kind of created this problem. Now, I think if you ban Tramp, the big Tramp, I think it fixes that. But I don't think it's just Tramp. So if you remember last year, it was Flavorsham, but it was also Fortisphere that they took out, right? I still, the last podcast I was on, I talked about, you got to get rid of Alsa and you got to get rid of Genie. I think that there's still, if you get rid of Tramp, you still need to do something with some of those purple cards, because then it's fabled meta again. It's Blurple versus purple still. That isn't very fun either, if you guys recall, right? So I think this is a good opportunity now. We had a great chance with Big Tramp. We had a great chance with Elsa. We had a great chance with Genie. Let's let's say you can play them still, but you can play them in Infinity now. Let's not play them in Core Constructed, is what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I like that. I think, to your point, if it can't just be one card, because that could, ironically, one card banned could tilt the meta, in an insane amount, whereas bands that attack multiple avenues might be able to overall balance the overall, meta share, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think the biggest frustrating that I've been seeing, and what I even noticed as an observer watching the DLC, was that on turn 3, this deck could cycle whatever card they wanted, and then that card ultimately, or more likely than not, ended up being a board wipe card, which is Under the Sea, which is absolutely crazy. And you're able to sing that on turn 4, I believe, the next turn, because you have a 7 cost and most likely another 1 or 2 cost on turn 4 to be able to switch. So I just think that's the crazy part of that deck. And I know people would come at me as kind of the resident red-blue player and be like, well, you had Be Prepared back in the day, right? It's like, I've been trying to play all these scenarios over the past 24 hours, and it's like, even then, Be Prepared was a 7 cost uninkable, and in red-blue, it wasn't that hard to get there. Usually by turn 5 you could get there, but it's not turn 3 or 4, right? And it's just crazy that a board wipe can come out that quick into a game when comparing it to something like Days of Old in red blue Be Prepared, for example.
And let's talk, because I think the next thing we should talk about is the differences of the two dogs lists that made the grand finals, right? So David's deck, he had 3 Under the Seas, and he had 2 Chromicons and 2 Mickeys. So a slight variation from the list that Sailor had the week before, right? So he put back the Chromicons. And the reason he put the Chromicons back in is because those are really good against Blurple. That's really against those matchups. You want to get ahead of Blurple, then you want to build a huge board, and then just play a Chromicon and win through Chromicon, in essence, against Blurple. And there's a couple other mid-range decks that it works great against, but Chromicon it's so hard to play against. It's so frustrating, tilting in a sense, right? And then the 2 Mickeys, you guys called it out on the last podcast where it sings Singer 8, but I think the other thing that you guys did kind of missed was it's kind of like a Chromicon, right? It's kind of like an inkable Chromicon, because it's 4 cost inkable, and it gives 2 more willpower to each of your characters. So it's kind of giving it's giving that survivability to your board, in essence, is what it's doing, right? And so that's why Sailor was playing so many, I think he was 3 or 4 Mickeys last week, right? And so he wasn't playing Chromicons though. And so that was his replacement. And the other thing is, it was inkable. The dogs decks play a lot of uninkables as it is, 18 to 20, which is just high. And so when you go up to 4 Under the Seas, you gotta make some adjustments one way or the other. So David's deck was a nice variation from Sailor's last week. And I saw a lot of lists similar to what David was playing. Those list was very similar to what David was playing, with 3 Under the Seas and 2 Chromicons. But what I really liked was Dan's tech. So, and what will be interesting is, does everyone see this as the best dogs version? And that'll tell you, this is, if you see a bunch of Zan's lists going against each other, then it's Bucky 2.0, right? Where everybody was playing the same Bucky list, and it was about who got the right card at the right time, and then there's no decisions anymore. It's just about what you drew, unfortunately, right? But to call it a couple things, so Zan stayed on the 4 Under the Seas, similar to what Sailor did, and the 4 Dalamoons, similar to what Sailor did. But he did 2 Chromicons and he did 2 Mickeys, right? So that sounds okay. He's messing with the numbers. Where I really was super impressed is he went to 8 one-drop ladies. So Sailor and David's list only played 2 of the uninkable lady, but he played all 4. But to be able to do that and keep your uninkables in the 18 to 19 range, he got rid of daisies. So he was not playing any daisies, which up to this point, daisy was like a must include in the dogs deck, right? But you gotta sacrifice something. And the reason he did the 4 ladies or the 4 uninkable ladies and the total of 8 uninkable ladies was shift lady. So with a shift lady, you can get, if you think about it, turn 1, 1-drop, turn 2, Willow and a lady, turn 3, shift the big lady on. You can now sing Under the Sea on turn 3. Pretty bonkers.
That makes sense.
And that is why he was able to win the mirror match all the times that he faced it during this weekend, because of that turn 3 lady shift into an Under the Sea. And he did it twice on stream. On the 4th and 5th game, he did that. And that was pretty much whoever gets the Under the Sea in the dogs matchup. I was watching the entire weekend. There was only one player that he got under the sea first, and he recovered and was able to under sea and still win. But in most cases, you lose to that first Under the Sea, it's over in a sense, because you've lost all those resources, you lost those singers, and it's over. What'll be interesting again, what do people follow Zan's line? And you see a very similar build what he's doing. And then again, it's not about play, it's just about who drew the lady at the right time, who drew the grandmother Willow, who had the Under the Sea at the right time. And that's not decision based. Now it becomes very much luck based at that point.
I need you to set the record straight, Ernie, because this is a question we had at the tail end of our episode last week. We weren't sure if the Mickey Amber Champion applied to the dual ink Amber cards. Do the dual ink cards still get the plus willpower, or is it solely just Amber cards?
It is. It does. So dual ink is both colors, so they do get the bonus also.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for setting the record straight. We needed to make sure we addressed that as a result of last weekend. I didn't really realize the math worked that way, that you could sing Under the Sea on turn 3. That's even more mind-boggling. That's crazy that you could have a board wipe in 3 turns, which leads to even more of the problem.
Yeah, well, so that's the answer against the other. So there's a lot of purple still decks that are trying to go under you right now. So that can take care of the purple still that's trying to go under you. It definitely helps in the mirror. But then against the purple still that's a little bit bigger, or the blurple that's a little bit bigger, both of these lists had 4 of the Rhino, the 1-drop Rhino that gives a -1. So any 3 power character is going to go down to 2, which is right in Under the Sea range. And then 4 of the Dalamoons. Well, 4 for Zan. I believe David was only running 3. But still, so you have 7 debuff type effects in your deck to get stuff down and then sweep them under with your Under the Sea. So it's just a more effective Under the Sea. So, and we can talk about this deck a little bit more later when we talk about the top decks. But any other questions about this tournament?
I'm curious, I think, Ernie, to start talking about anti-dog tech as we're kind of on this, right? Like, okay, dog versus dog final. It seems like it's cropping up. It's going crazy. How do you stop it?
Well, depends on what color you're playing. But, some of the tech that I saw there, and there's other things, obviously, right? But like, for example, Blurple or any of the purple colors, but primarily Blurple, what I saw, a lot of them had previously been playing Royal Guard, and they switched back to Rafiki, right? 3-power Rafiki. And the reason they did that is a lot of the decks this weekend were playing Isis Vanderchill. Do you guys know what that card is? So 4 cost, uninkable, 4/4. When it comes into play, exert target character. So you're getting an Elsa a turn earlier. So you turn 1, you play your Rafiki, turn 2, ramp, turn 3, Isis, smash something. Turn 4, Elsa, smash 2 more, smash something else. So that's your way to control, in essence, the dogs deck. You saw also a lot of um, Tiggers, the 4-drop Tigger that's from the new set. So same general thing is just bouncing a 2 or less cost character back to the character or item back to their hand. Obviously, you're picking a character in that case, so you're bouncing stuff and you're playing the tempo game there. Still has Angel and her throwing snowballs. So Angel, I think it's 62 experiment 624. Um, Drop an Angel, throw snowballs. Get rid of Grandma Willow. Get rid of um, the any of the pesky little guys, right? So it's just a great answer. And then the red decks, you saw a lot of red decks playing Grab Your Bow, right? So the song that you see, it's a song, five cost, uninkable. You get to, I think, banish up to 2 chosen characters that have 2 power or less. Which, guess what, guys? All dogs, except for the big lady, all the rest of them, and I guess Nani now. Um, all the rest of them are 2 power or less. So you're able to answer that way too. So there are tech cards in here. Um, the question will be how much dogs you expect, right? Because as you play more of these type of cards, some of them don't help you in all matchups. Now, Angel, I think, is an all-around all-star, right? Get your Angels now, because as the rotation flips, this is your super card in the next set rotation, right? Along with Dumbo and Demona, right? Um, Isis Vanderchill, I think it's a good card against anything that's character based, right? The challenge is uninkable, but then like Grab Your Sword, that starts to get a little more clunky, right? If you're playing a mid range deck, or you're playing, um, you don't have a way to do buff stuff. Grab Your Bow could be a little less effective. But those are some of the things you can do for sure.
Yeah, I've been experimenting, especially with red, because One True Love, right? Grab Your Bow has been fun. And in combo with the Headless Horseman, that kind of works really nicely. You play the Headless Horseman with 5 ink, then the next turn you sing with the Headless Horseman. Works out quite conveniently. But yeah, I think ultimately, though, it's due to, and you mentioned it before, due to the new Grandmother Willow, it just makes this deck so much faster. So you got to do a lot of catch up. But if you're able to manage the board and get through, especially that first tramp, it tends to balance out. Now, that ultimately is the question: is what does Tramp get on his first filter? If it's Under the Sea or a second Tramp, good luck to you, right? And then you mentioned the Nani, and we haven't even mentioned Nani yet. It's just such like a guaranteed. It's like an inkable genie. It's almost like a guaranteed card draw, and it's a 3 strength card draw due to the fact that it's like a bare minimum of 95% that you're gonna find a 2-cost character or less with that filter in the Nani. Ironically, I did see. I think it was in the final. The one time that David played Nani, I think he missed, which kind of was mind blown.
Yeah.
While I was following the final, that of the one time and in the most crucial time, he ended up missing a Nani trigger, which is a little unfortunate.
Well, and if you think about it, so prior to, before Winter Spell came out, you were starting to see some dog decks play the 3-drop Clarabelle, the one that lets you draw a card if you have less cards than the other player. And really, the one thing so dogs is a good card advantage deck, but they're not a good draw deck, right? So their card advantage comes from now Nani, but also Big Lady, right? So Big Lady will bring something back, right? That's not technically draw, but it's getting your hand filled. And you want your hand filled because when you start playing the big tramps, you want to be able to keep more of the cards that you're seeing, right? When you tramp for 8 and you got to put 7 of the cards, or you're gonna put 8 cards away, but you only get to keep 1. That's not as effective if you get to keep 2, 3, or 4, right? So what Nani does is definitely help from that perspective. And then what I love about, I was playing this last week. I did play dogs last week at a locals, and bouncing on Nani with your own Chromacon is so fun and so mean at the same time, right? Especially if you got 2 Chromacons, you bounce something of theirs, bounce something of yours, and then you get to play Nani again and get to proc it again. It's so mean, for sure.
Okay, so that being said, Ernie, I think before we get into the deck profiles, there was another really big tournament this weekend, and that was the Houston CCS tournament. That was a 25K, and a deck that we have not seen for quite some time won the whole thing. Tell us about that, Ernie.
Yeah, so Skylar Dunce, or he's known as Sky. Great player. He finished second place at Richmond, green blue mirror. Sky has been playing since this probably set 2 or 3. Known for a blue steel player, as a blue steel player initially. Great player. 200 player field at Houston CCS, so this was not an easy tournament by any means. And he was playing Amber Still. And if you remember, when Fabled came out, he won. I believe he qualified. He won one of the first CCQs with a Amber Still aggro deck. What do you call it? Truby Tuesdays, I believe, is what he called it. This is an Amber Still deck, but this is not an aggro deck. This is more closer to an Amber Still song deck in essence. And so I would say it's a mid-range deck. It's playing only 1/1 drop. It's playing technically it's got the underdog Angel, right? So it could have more 1 drops. And then it's got all the good stuff in Amber and Still along with Ariel, right? And so you're playing mid-range characters. You have I can't even pronounce that. What is it? Akud et Umuti, the song. I butchered it, I'm sure. Right? I didn't even watch that movie, so I didn't even know that was a song.
Fine. I thought you did well.
So that song lets you draw a card, and you get to play the next character for 2 less, which when you're playing a lot of mid-range characters, that's kind of nice. And then if you're playing Ariel and she has a card under her, you get to draw an extra card, right? So, but it's playing that. It's playing Strength of a Raging Fire. It's playing he hurled the Thunderbolt. So it's just got a good removal. I think the MVP of the list though is Chief Powhatan, who is a 4-drop 5/5 that can attack, but it can sing and it's a beast of a bodyguard. So Sky won with that list. He actually beat a Dogs deck in top 4 and Purple Steel in the finals. Now, he was going first. I would tell you that Purple Steel is probably a 50-50 match, so it's really dependent on who's going first. But he was going first, so that definitely helped. But I do want to call out that Diego Zaz also played a version of this Amber Still deck to a 3rd place finish in one of the top 16s at Ghent. So his version was a little different. Instead of Ariels, he was playing Goliath. So he had Goliath, which Goliath is kind of cool because it's a good Blurple answer. Blurple hates Goliath, right? That's like a must answer because they don't want to give up cards and they don't like it. But if I was gonna play one of these 2 lists, I think I'd play Sky's list. I think I like the Ariel, and I think this has a lot of potential. I do think that this deck struggles against Blurple is the one challenge. Chief Powhatan is not that great against stuff like Into the Unknown. To be honest with you, right? So, but great deck and a good example of this is not a Dogs list. Could this be the number 4 deck? Potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially.
So a play line, I'm actually looking at this where, like, if you were running something like this against a Dogs list and you are on the draw and you play that Angel, the underdog, right? You could play a Cood. She could sing a Cood, right? And then you could play Angel, the 4-cost legendary, on turn 2 and throw a snowball right away. Like, legitimately throw a snowball on turn 2 on their Willow, for example. That's kind of amazing.
Which really screws up their turn 3 trap. But yeah, really amazing.
And like, now that you have that established too, right? Anything they play henceforth is probably just going to get picked off by that card, right? So That's kind of amazing. Yeah, that, and then you can start. Then the next turn, you could play another character, sing strength, and like, I don't know, you're kind of off to the races then, and now you're suddenly turning sideways pretty quickly, and then yeah, it's way harder for them to get to that full sync together possibility now because you've picked off the early stuff so efficiently. This deck actually looks like a ton of fun. This Amber Steel, more mid-rangey. Yeah, this is really cool.
Great card draw engine too. I mean, if you think about whether you're playing the Ariel or you're playing the Goliath, but it also has Stitch, right?
And this is the new one.
Carefree, yeah, the snowboarder. So they've got some good ways, and docks. They're playing their full complement of docks, right? So, and guess what? Nani goes and finds your dock. That's kind of nice. That's kind of really nice, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that, and again, I think we've said this before too, right? Like a deck like this that's never really going to have like a ton of cards in its hand, when you get to find that dock and then play it off of Nani, that feels absolutely incredible. Yeah, I haven't purchased a ton of singles yet for Winterspell, but the Carefree Snowboarder is a card that I went out and got a playset of already because I do think it's a very good card. And it's just very consistent, and I think it's like, oh, shocking, the purple player likes to draw cards, so he grabs the amber card draw card. But I think that card was really interesting, and yeah, I think, Ernie, to your earlier point, like, Angel feels like she's here to stay, and there's iterations of decks where you're going to see her. It's not just going to be Amethyst Steel that you see that card come out. So this is a great example of that card doing a ton of damage in a different deck combination entirely and being incredibly effective.
And if you guys haven't got your Aerials, that was from last set, right? Get your playset of Aerials right now that they're cheap, because I do see Ariel being an all-star in the next year. It's only going to continue to get better as they have more. I mean, they've got, if you look at Akud and you look Strength of Raging Fire and the Thunderbolt, I mean, those are great songs. They get one more, that's just going to be crazy for this group.
Return of Steel Song, for sure. I mean, that, at least this is the start of it, right? This almost feels like the one that broke the mold, whereas we've talked a lot, I have harped a lot on like breaking the mold, bringing Ruby Sapphire back. It's not quite there, but like you're starting to get those cards, and a staple from pre-rotation, Steel Song, right? Like trying to come back and come back into the meta for sure in full force. I like this. I think there's even other ways too. You could even get bigger in this type of deck if you wanted to run more of the Vanessas, and you could even put, a Circle of Life with maybe the big Stitches, right? Like you could get even bigger in trying to sing. It might not be optimal, but just kind of like getting the brain working on the potentials of bringing back a familiar face in Steel Song, so to speak. But one thing I've noticed, not only in this, but also with Ghent, and then we can get into the deck profiles of kind of like the big three decks that we see, and then maybe a couple more that are breaking in, is like these underdog cards, I think, are starting to show how effective they can be, especially with Skylar's lists in the Angel. Obviously, the Christopher Robin underdog has been huge with Amethyst. I think one that's underrated is the Liquidator. I think if Ruby Sapphire comes back, that's a really fun list, especially talking about dogs and dogs' answers. Having a 4/2 Reckless card on turn 1 potentially, if you're on the draw, that can be huge in those aggro matches for sure. So underdog, I think, is something that will only get better as we start seeing not only another set of cards come out with what's the next set? 12? Then getting into rotation when the underdogs start becoming more, predominant and become more popular within the meta due to a decrease in the overall card pool, because they'll all survive the next rotation, right? So deck profiles. Is there anything that can beat these top three? The top three being dogs, which is Emerald, Amber, Amethyst, or Sapphire, Amethyst, and Blurple, and then Amethyst Steel. Is there something else that can break into these, or do we continue to see that these are the top decks? What are your thoughts on the overall meta share in deck profiles? And maybe you can run over a couple of them, Ernie, and your thoughts on them.
Yeah, so I really think it depends on, are they going to do any type of bans or anything like that, any changes, right? Um, if they don't, if this is the meta we're in, these are the top 3 decks. Now, you know, we're talking from a very competitive level tournament, right? You go to a a set championship, right? It could be a little bit different, right? You could see maybe 1 or 2 players playing these type of decks, but not everybody decks, right? So put that in perspective. I do think that understanding where you play and understanding the meta can help you pick a deck that could angle to beat that and kind of angle shoot that meta. So there's that opportunity. If you know, I know these type of decks are going to show up, you could definitely do some of that and metagame. But yeah, so if you think about it, so Dog, the Emerald Amber, I do think this is the top deck in the meta. I also think it is the hardest deck to play. You know, most people fall in the trap that this is just an aggro deck. This is not an aggro deck. It can win by aggroing out and playing weenies, like Nathaniel likes to say, but it also is, it's about choosing the right line of play. And sometimes the right thing to do is do nothing. Just sit there, right? And accumulate cards in your hand and accumulate the board and wait for the Chromicon or wait for the Under the Sea that you're going to sing, or, you know, waiting for those things. So, and if you were watching the Ghent stream at all, you saw a lot of that where they were at 0 lore and then they quested 10 a turn, you know? So these things can just burst like nothing before. I think the MVP cards definitely are the Big Tramp, obviously the Under the Sea, the Chromicon, the Big Lady, especially now with being able to sing Under the Sea on turn 3, and Grandmother Willow. This deck was good since Fabled. This deck was previously Chernodogs, if you recall, before the rotation. But the Grandmother Willow just hypercharged it in a sense. The tough matchups for this deck, definitely Amber Still. So the list that we just reviewed, Sky's list, is very much favored into this deck. It also can at times have some challenges in Purple Still. It depends on the Purple Still build. The Purple Still build has to be angled to beat it, but Purple Still can give this a hard time. And I think the critical thing with decks and how to beat it is you got to know when to race it, right? There's a point where you're board control, but there's a point where you should use every chance that you can quest against a Dog's deck, quest. They will never attack, all right? And you want to get as much lore there so that you can win in the end. Because there's been so many games that I've seen people lose to Dogs, they lost by 1 or 2 lore. If they had been questing, like example, quest the 1-drop Captain Hook. You know, most people don't want to quest. They want to save it to swing for 3. If they're really going to take out that Captain Hook, or they're going to take out that 2 quester that you have, they're losing characters and they're not advancing their own board game. So they fall into your own trap. So again, knowing when to race and knowing when to board control is critical. And then Chromicon is just a monster. If you do Chromicon, there's rare situations where you can win in a Chromicon battle. You can be done, and you got to analyze when you can do that. But in most cases, that's when you just you go for the full on race. So talking about Blurple, I do think that this is the number 2 deck in the meta. I think this is the ultimate mid-range deck, right? It's the closest we have to control until the meta settles a little bit more and you get some more control decks in the meta. What I would tell you about this deck, it has defined list and play lines. You know what you're going to do 1 through 4, right? And for that matter, prior to this weekend, I was saying like 54 to 55 of the cards were locked. I think about 50 of the cards are locked. There's about a 10 card variation that you could shift out different cards now. I mean, it's a pretty defined list, and it's consistent. And I think the biggest thing is it has 12 plus removal spells, right? So you've got Big Hades, you've got Into the Unknown, you've got Let It Go, and then you've got the 5-drop Hades that either it's a removal spell or a draw 2 spell that's going to draw you into a removal spell. So it's like darn if you do, darn if you don't, right? So that's why I say 12 plus, right? the MVP cards for this, there's too many to list, right? Pretty much every one of these, they just play all the best. They're the good stuff stack. And I think the true MVP though is ramp. If they get the turn 2 ramp, they're in the game. If they don't get the turn 2 ramp, it's a little more complicated, but they've now started to play things like Cheshire Cat that they can play on turn 3 if they didn't get the ramp. They have what's the 2-drop item that lets you draw cards? I'm forgetting.
Ink Runner?
No. The
guidebook.
Guidebook, yeah. So you have some things now that you can play on turn 3 if you don't get the ramp, but the ramp is definitely the MVP for this deck. The tough matchups, definitely dogs. Dogs, a good dogs player will beat the Blurple player every time. Any hyper aggro gives it a hard time too, especially if it's going first. And then green blue definitely owns this deck, but green blue is still trying to find its way. So you're not seeing as much green blue right now. And purple still, depending on the build, can beat it now. It used to be very favored for the Blurple deck, but now there's enough tools that purple still can beat it. The problem is when purple still starts to angle towards the dogs deck, then it loses against the Blurple deck. That's the challenge. So you got that. That's where I was talking about understanding what's going to show up in your meta and figuring out, do I want to beat the dogs deck or do I want to beat the Blurple deck? What I would say about this deck too is I think this is the bouncer of the meta, right? So this is the best fair deck, but it keeps all of the decks that are angling towards Blurple or dogs, in essence. Did I just jump to purple still? I just jumped to purple still, didn't I?
Yeah. So you're talking about purple steel now.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I started talking about purple still and I got excited about purple still. Let me finish on Blurple real quick. How to beat Blurple is very simple. Race it and card advantage it is what you have to do. Blurple is one of the toughest matchups to play against. And sometimes it just feels like you're always like a half step behind and you just lose. And it just feels, it's probably the most frustrating way to lose because you're in it all the way to the end and then they just win. And that's, sometimes a blowout feels better, to be honest with you, in some of these games. It feels bad when you're just there, and how many times do you lose by 2 or 3 lore to a Blurple deck?
Blurple feels like it's one of those where like you finally feel like you get the card advantage and then they play Demona or Hades or something else and then you immediately lose it. So it's like as soon as you feel you get that high, it's just all of a sudden you're just dropping straight down. That's how I feel about Blurple.
Yeah, Blurple is also just unique, I think, right now in the sense that like there's like half, it almost feels like half the deck is card draw and half the deck is removal in a lot of ways. In some format, and those aren't strict numbers, of course, but I think between those two things, right, like they're always doing something on, like with all of those cards, there's very few just like, to your point, Ernie, like all the cards are super powerful, where like I've found games like practicing with Blurple where I don't even really care if in my opening hand I don't see any type of card draw there. Because you know you're going to draw into it. Like it's just, your odds of seeing card draw are just so high that like the deck is built in such a way that you can just like ink guidebooks because you're going to get a Demona, or ink the Demona because you can Hades and guidebook anyways, or ink all your Dumbos. Like Dumbo doesn't feel that impactful a lot of times in those Blurple decks right now. It can be very good like in like the really grindy games, but it just has so many different card draw tools that it's just like inevitable that like the next card or two, it's going to help you refill your hand over and over again. Yeah, it's the power level of that deck seems crazy right now.
And it's one of those decks that, with a good pilot, it feels like unbeatable in some cases, right? It's just a really good pilot knows what the right lines of play. It's just, it's amazing to watch and horrible to play against when you're playing against a good pilot with Blurple. So going to purple still, which I kind of previewed a little bit, that is the third deck. I think it's the best fair deck, right? So it's the card advantage machine. So from last rotation, the people that loved Ruby Amethyst, this is in essence the Ruby Amethyst for this rotation, right? And again, like I mentioned just a second ago, it is the bouncer of the meta. It's keeping, so there are decks that can beat Blurple. There are decks that can beat dogs. but purple still is the one that's kind of gatekeeping all those decks out of the meta, because it is probably one of the most popular played decks. It was the most played deck on both of the days, day one and day two in Ghent, right? And it's just it's a nice solid deck. There's a lot of powerful cards, a lot of card advantage, and so people want to play it. But then it also just beats down all those interesting decks. I saw a interesting Amber Ruby deck that was playing Grab Your the Bows, was playing the Liquidator that you mentioned, was playing a lot of boost characters, was playing Webby's Journal and drawing. It was a fun looking deck, and it was on day two. But again, those are decks that just Purple Still's going to eat alive, unfortunately. The MVP cards, they're almost like Blurple. They play it's Purple and still good stuff, right? But I'd say definitely Doc, Strength of a Raging Fire, Cheshire Cat, Demona, to name a few, are the MVP cards for Purple Still. There's so many. I mean, you got Dumbo, or you got now Yzma. I mean, Genie, Alsa, they just got it all. The tough matchups for them, though, is Blurple, depending on the build. Dogs can be a tough matchup, too, depending on the build. And blue-green is hard. And now that Amber Still is like a 50-50 match, like I mentioned. So if Amber Still goes first, it's a tough sledding. But it's pretty even depending on the build. But it's a tough match regardless. How to beat it? It's a grind out with purples. You'll see Purple Still where they're not even questing for a while, right? They're standing still until their Demona comes out, right? You got to ground it out. You got to win the lore race, and you got to know when to chip away at lore with them. Is in essence what you got to do, and you got to hope they don't have the Purple Still great opening, which is 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, seeing Strength of Raging Fire. That's probably the most annoying thing to play against, right? So, and they're pretty consistent about getting that because of all the card draw. Anything to add? Because I know you love Purple Still.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting... There was this comment that Ryan made during one of the post roundup of a sealed event where he had talked about this standoff in one of his matchups, which is very common in sealed events, right? Just play a character pass, and no one's turning things sideways. A lot of those Purple Steel matchups, especially Purple Steel mirrors, it's kind of funny to watch because basically the first 3 turns for both players, unless someone misses a character on their turn, on curve, it's basically like that, where it's just all my guys are upright, all your guys are upright, but if the person who's on the play gets the Demona first, it's incredibly crippling. And the same thing goes with Ruby Amethyst mirrors, right? It's kind of like that too, where it's play a card pass for both players, and then there's this big interaction turn that just almost feels like it's inevitable, and whoever gets it is going to be favored at 75% or more to win at that point. Kind of it's funny because it's the more middle of the game that's happening, and it's a mid-range deck. It's that race to Under the Sea for Dogs mirrors, right? It's that Demona turn in those Purple Steel mirrors can be usually just so crippling for one player. So, because now your hooks are doing all the trade ups and everything like that. And you get to do all these awesome trades, and they are just kind of left to be ouch, that really hurt. So yeah, and Purple Steel is, the power level is extremely strong. I think one thing, Ernie, that I've seen that's a really fun, newer interaction with Purple Steel is with the Olaf card that was released last set. And Olaf has amazing synergy with getting the important card that Purple Steel needs. So, for example, bouncing a Doc back to your hand, or bouncing a Demona back to your hand, because maybe you have so many cards in your hand because they're Demoning you, or it's kind of locked in place and you can't do anything. Well, you might as well crash your Olaf into something and bring the Demona back, so that then you can empty your hand, play it again, and then just recycle. So kind of doing some new age bounce things, we'll call it, with that Olaf card. I think that's a secret, kind of a dark horse, not MVP, but can do really cool, interesting things in a Purple Steel build because it usually runs low to the ground. So getting the 1 or 2 important card draw cards back into your hand can tend to swing some matchups.
So the other thing, so it can bounce your boosted Genie, because Genie's another card, the 3-drop Genie that you boost, and It gets an extra lore pip, the Cheshire Cat, and get all the cards that are underneath them, right? And what a cool little thing that you can do now is you can actually play your Angel, throw a snowball at your Olaf. Say they don't want to exert anything. You throw your snowball at Olaf to bounce something back to reset some of those cards too. So that's pretty crazy too. So yeah, Purple's starting to do some fun, those type of interactions, which is just awesome.
All thematic with Winter Spell and Snowballs, right? That's kind of fun
Yeah.
too. But then the last one, right, is Amber Steel. We touched a lot on it with Skylar's list. But any other thing you want to talk about with specific MVP cards that you might not have mentioned before, or some tough matchups, or how to beat it? Because to your point earlier, this might be a dark horse and something that might gain a lot of popularity now that we have this list that broke through with Skylar's list.
Definitely see this list as the dark horse and coming up now. People tend to like Amber Steel. I was looking at TCG Player. The Epic Stitches, Snowboard Stitch, because they had an Epic Snowboard Stitch. Those are going for $33 right now because of this list, right? The Enchanted Angels going for over $270 right now. There's a couple different lists that are getting played with that, right? But this list is a big reason for that. Amber Steel is always a favorite for players, just like Purple Steel. So you're going to see this. It beats the Apex Predator in Docs, right? So if we don't get a ban, you're definitely going to see this as an answer. So the thing is, I think I touched on the MVP cards: Chief Paladin, Angel, Ariel, Snowboard Stitch, right? I think the tough matchups are definitely the purple matchups, right? So Blurple and Purple Steel. I do think that Amber Amethyst or Yellow Purple struggles against this because a lot of the cool things that it has against the other purple decks doesn't work great against this deck, right? I guess the one song that gets rid of a 5-power can get rid of the Chief Paladin, right? So I guess that's okay. But the Horseman Strikes does not. It's an inked card now, right? So that's an MVP in any of the purple matchups. It's just straight ink now in this matchup, right? But I do think that the Blurple and the Purple Steel are tough matchups. How do you beat this? Is just removing key targets. You can't let an Ariel sit there and draw a bunch of cards for them. You can't let the Snowboarder Stitch stick around and draw cards for them, right? You gotta target selection is critical against this deck, and as people get more familiar, it's more beatable. I think what really helps Sky out is what's the play lines to beat this, so people will figure it out. And so I do think that this will happen with this deck, but I still do think this deck has the potential to be that number 4 deck on the list. And for that matter, there's 6 or 7 other decks fighting for this spot, to be honest. So if you would get rid of some of the annoying cards, it is a pretty healthy meta. If you think there's a lot of playable decks, it's just there's definitely a separation between that S tier and everything else is the challenge.
Which I think, again, just kind of to bring this full circle in that circle of life that Mac likes to reference, kind of brings us back right to that point where when that happened during set 7 with Hiram, we did have like basically a set and a half of like this really robust set of decks. I thought, at least, Ernie, or like it kind of felt like every set champs a different color combination won at that one. I think, yes, Steel Song was like pretty popular towards the back end of that, but I think there was just a ton of variety, and it did feel like, yes, maybe there were like 3 or 4 tier 1s, but any of those tier 2 ones were like still very, very viable. And I think by maybe removing a couple of these like problem cards, maybe you get that again. And that felt like, to me, like this golden age of my time in Lorcana in some ways, because I missed the first 4 sets. So I guess for what's from my perspective, that was like a really fun time because it did feel like you could try lots of different things. I think you actually played a different deck list at every set champs you played in. And won most of them, if I might add.
I won with 4 different lists, I think, in that set. Yeah, it was a fun set championship for sure. And for that matter, I think we're almost at the 1-year anniversary of when they banned Hiram and the Fortisphere. We're almost exactly 1 year from that point. So this would make the timing set up for this if they were going to do something, for sure.
Yeah, I think the one thing that they can maybe lean on and justify not doing it is, besides this weekend that you mentioned, Ernie, the next iteration of DLCs are Infinity. So, like, they don't feel like they need to ban things from, like, a competitive level, because Infinity, you're going to be able to bring all those cards back anyways, right? But I think the one point I want to make is, like, all these fringe decks, right? Like, them being Ruby, Amethyst, saw some play at Ghent for sure. I think Sapphire Steel is something that I've continued to enjoy that's close. We mentioned Emerald Amethyst is something that we saw a couple lists do well. So, like, there are decks there that are playable, right? They're just kind of hidden behind these really daunting S tier decks that I think people have noticed. But I do want to harp on your point, or agree with you and be in alignment with you, Ernie, on the sense that, like, set champs, we see a lot of variety still, and I want to make sure our listeners know that, like, don't be freaked out and expecting that these are the only lists that you're going to see. I think a perfect example, Ernie, is when you played blue green, and I didn't even mention that. That's still there. And when at our last Issues Needed set championship for set 10, Blurple was a popular deck, right? And it still has been. There wasn't a single person that played Blurple at that set champs, for example. We saw like 7 or 8 unique decks at that specific set champs, and that's just something that locally I think people want to play the colors that they like to play rather than playing the ones that are the most competitive or the most anticipated competitive decks at, like, a DLC, for example. So there are still options there. Don't feel like you need to play these top 3 or 4 lists, but because there's still a lot of, diamonds there in the rough, so to speak, right behind these dogs, these Blurples, and these Amethyst Steel decks that we've highlighted as a result on the heels of a major DLC in Ghent this past weekend.
All right, Ernie, any final thoughts as we transition into the back half of Winter Spell? Just as far as maybe what you're planning on looking for, things that you're excited about, anything before we wrap up, put a bow on this episode, I think Mac likes to say.
Yeah, I'm already looking forward to the next set. I want Pixar. So
me too.
I'm so excited for that. I'm excited for set championship, whether they ban or don't ban anything. I think, that's always fun. And, what'll happen is, people angle to they want to win they want to win, whether it's a card or they're trying for the mat or whatever. And once that happens, then you start to see people try different decks. So I think the first couple of weeks will be the toughest, and then you'll start to see variety start to come back in. So I am excited for that. Right now, I do have a ticket for Brazil. Brazil will actually be part of this meta. So it's like the last week of April. So right now my wife and I are headed to Brazil right now. So I may change that, especially if I got to play dogs, but I'm excited right now to go to Brazil. That'd be kind of cool. Even if I owe 3 in Brazil, I'm in Brazil. I mean, what can you say? So
that's awesome. So jealous. Good luck to you there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that sounds like a blast, and we'll obviously be following along if you do indeed end up playing there. Maybe we won't follow as closely if you end up playing dogs. Who knows? But that sounds super exciting, Ernie. And Ernie, thank you for joining us on this episode. It's always great to hear your sage wisdom, right? Like, you have this amazing background in card games where you've seen more than I think the average Lorcana player has seen in card games before, when alarm bells can be rung, when it's, hey, cooler heads prevail, all those things, right? You've seen some of these things before, and I think brings some really good perspective on what we can expect. And you definitely helped me a lot, right? I think, as I've mentioned before, 2 of my 3 career set champs have been entirely lists built by you. So love going back to that. Well, I'll keep returning. But again, thank you so much for joining, Ernie. It's been a pleasure as always. If you are wanting more Ducktail Dads content, we are on Instagram. We do post somewhat regularly on there, depending on the dad's bandwidth. You can find us also, the video form of this episode, on our YouTube channel, as well as being available on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts, depending on where you get your podcast content. But until next time, gentlemen, let's get the duck out of here.